So this is how your career ends?
No. This is how something else begins.
I need 5 minutes.
What do you need?
Donald Thomas was 39, a quiet operations director at a logistics company in downtown Chicago. Most people believed the cardboard box in his hands marked the end of his career. Even his wife, Luna Thomas, laughed and decided she had finally married a man who would never become extraordinary. Donald still drove an aging Ford Explorer, brewed his own coffee every dawn, and carried handwritten notebooks instead of expensive tablets. What nobody knew was that someone far more powerful had been waiting for the exact moment his employee badge became useless. Then Luna smiled, clapped once, and said, "Maybe now you'll finally admit you were never meant to lead," just as Donald laid his badge on the polished conference table and quietly reached for his phone. If you're watching from somewhere in the world, tell me your country and your local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where these stories travel. And if you love slow-burning stories about resilience, justice, and unexpected twists, take a moment to subscribe. There's another unforgettable journey waiting for you tomorrow. Donald Thomas left the downtown Chicago office building at exactly 4:42 p.m. The October wind rolled between the glass towers on West Wacker Drive, scattering yellow leaves across the sidewalk. Employees streamed past him carrying backpacks, talking about dinner reservations, Little League practice, and weekend football games. No one stopped. No one looked back. His cardboard box was lighter than most people imagined. One framed photograph, a leather notebook, 2 fountain pens, a coffee mug with a faded navy stripe around the rim. His security badge was gone. Everything else had already belonged to someone else. Donald placed the box carefully into the back seat of his 8-year-old Ford Explorer. The engine hesitated before starting just as it had every morning for nearly 6 months. He never bothered replacing it. If something still worked, he saw no reason to throw it away. The drive to Naperville usually took 45 minutes. That afternoon, traffic stretched it past an hour. He kept both hands on the steering wheel, while Luna's final words replayed inside his memory. "You were never meant to lead." She had not whispered them. She had wanted everyone nearby to hear. Donald remembered several co-workers lowering their eyes instead of meeting his. Not out of sympathy, out of discomfort. Embarrassment spreads quietly in corporate America. No one wants to stand too close to the person everyone believes has failed. Donald did not turn on the radio. Instead, he watched the familiar landmarks pass: the Chicago River, Union Station, the Eisenhower Expressway, rows of warehouses, construction cranes standing against gray autumn clouds. Every mile carried him farther from the office where he had spent nearly 12 years. Yet something unusual settled over him. Not panic, not anger, almost relief. When he finally turned into Ashbury Drive, the neighborhood looked exactly as it always had. Children chased bicycles across driveways. A mail carrier pushed letters into polished black mailboxes. Halloween decorations covered front lawns weeks ahead of schedule. Normal. Completely normal. His own house stood near the end of the street. Large enough to impress visitors. Too expensive when viewed honestly. Luna had insisted they buy it 3 years earlier. "It fits the image," she had said. Donald had preferred something smaller. The mortgage payment arrived every month with perfect punctuality. He parked inside the garage and lifted the cardboard box. The front door was unlocked. Inside, soft jazz played through hidden ceiling speakers. The smell of expensive vanilla candles drifted through the hallway. Luna stood in the kitchen wearing cream-colored designer pants and a fitted cashmere sweater. She wasn't cooking. She was scrolling through social media while an untouched charcuterie board rested on the marble island. She looked up for exactly 1 second. Then her eyes moved directly to the cardboard box. "So," she said calmly, "it actually happened." Donald placed the box beside the staircase. "Yes." "Did they give you severance?" "Not, are you okay? Not, what happened, only money." Donald removed his coat before answering. 12 weeks. Luna stared, then laughed, not loudly. Worse. A short, amused laugh someone makes after hearing an obvious joke. 12 weeks, she repeated. That's it. Donald nodded. She leaned against the kitchen counter. I told you years ago that staying loyal to one company was stupid. Donald walked toward the refrigerator. He poured himself a glass of water. Luna followed him. You know Ethan Collins? Donald nodded. Ethan had once worked in sales. He just bought a lake house. She continued before Donald could answer. And Melissa's husband made partner at Deloitte. Another pause. Even Blake Sterling just posted photos from his Aspen vacation. Donald drank quietly. Luna folded her arms. What do I tell people now? Donald looked at her. You tell them I lost my job. She shook her head. You really don't understand. No, I don't. This isn't just your problem. She pointed around the kitchen. This house. Our friends. The neighborhood. My reputation. Donald watched sunlight reflect across the polished marble countertop. Everything inside this kitchen had been selected by Luna. Imported Italian lighting, custom cabinets, designer stools. None of it had made either of them happier. She crossed toward him again. I married someone who was supposed to keep moving upward. Donald remained silent. She mistook silence for surrender. You've always been... She searched for the word. Comfortable. Donald finished the glass of water. I've always been careful. No. You've always been afraid. Those words landed harder than the laughter, because they were not spoken in anger. They were spoken with certainty. Donald turned away. The staircase creaked beneath his footsteps. Upstairs, the master bedroom appeared strangely organized. Too organized. Several drawers stood half empty. One closet door remained open. 3 expensive suitcases rested neatly beside the wall. Already packed. Donald stopped. He didn't ask why. Instead, he noticed something else. Luna's wedding ring sat inside a small ceramic jewelry tray beside the bathroom sink. She had removed it before he came home. Not after. Before. His eyes moved toward the nightstand. Her phone vibrated. The screen lit briefly. A message preview appeared. Looking forward to tonight. Blake Donald didn't touch the phone. He simply memorized what he saw. Time? 4:58 p.m. Sender, Blake. Nothing more. Years working in operations had trained him to notice facts before drawing conclusions. Facts mattered. Assumptions created mistakes. He opened the hallway closet. Inside sat a black, fireproof document case. He carried it into the home office. The room overlooked the backyard. Quiet, orderly. Exactly as he had left it that morning. Donald unlocked the case. Inside were neatly labeled folders: mortgage, insurance, taxes, retirement, joint investments. Every statement organized by month. Every receipt scanned. Every financial document backed up. Most people considered his filing habits excessive. Donald considered them peaceful. He connected an encrypted external drive to his laptop. The backup began automatically. Progress bar, 1%, 5%, 12%. Behind him, Luna entered without knocking. You don't have to copy everything. I'm organizing, she shrugged. You always organize. Donald continued working. She leaned against the doorway. You know, I've been thinking. He waited. I don't think this marriage works anymore. The words entered the room almost casually, like discussing weather. Donald clicked another folder. I figured. She frowned. You figured. I saw the luggage. Silence. I also noticed your ring. More silence. Luna looked genuinely surprised. Not guilty, surprised, as though she had expected him not to notice. You don't seem upset. Donald saved another file. I don't see the point. She crossed her arms. You're making this too easy. I don't believe arguments change facts. She looked at him for several long seconds. You really are impossible. No. I'm predictable. And that's exactly the problem. She turned towards the hallway. Oh. Without looking back, she added one final sentence. Blake is picking me up for dinner. The front door closed 15 minutes later. Donald stood alone inside the house. The backup reached 100%. He disconnected the drive, locked it inside the fireproof case, then opened the bedroom closet one final time. He packed one medium suitcase, 5 dress shirts, 2 suits, running shoes, toiletries, his father's old leather notebook. Nothing else. When he carried the suitcase downstairs, the house felt enormous. Empty, quiet. He placed his wedding ring carefully beside Luna's on the bathroom counter. Not as a gesture of anger, simply because it no longer belonged on his hand. Donald turned off every light before leaving. The garage door closed slowly behind him. As the Ford Explorer rolled away from the house, his phone vibrated for the first time all evening. The caller ID displayed only 2 words: Harrison Whitmore. Donald looked at the name without answering. Then the phone rang again. Donald let the phone ring a 3rd time before pressing the answer button. Harrison? The voice on the other end carried the confidence of a man who had spent 40 years making billion-dollar decisions. I've been waiting for this call for 18 months. Donald glanced at the dashboard clock. 5:41 p.m. So it finally happened, Harrison Whitmore said. Yes? No surprises, Donald thought for a moment. The timing was earlier than expected. But not unexpected. A quiet chuckle came through the speaker. That's why I chose you? Donald guided the Explorer toward Interstate 88 instead of returning to the house. He already knew he wasn't going back that night. You never panic, Harrison continued. You observe first. Donald remained silent. The billionaire had always appreciated silence. Most executives rushed to fill empty space. Donald never had. Where are you now? Harrison asked. Driving. Good. I've already instructed the legal team to release the activation package. Donald nodded. I assumed you would. The board approved everything 37 minutes after Victor Langford terminated your employment. Donald wasn't surprised. The agreement had always been precise. Nothing became official until he no longer worked for another logistics company. Not 1 minute sooner. Harrison lowered his voice. Congratulations, Donald. You are officially the Chief Executive Officer of Whitmore Strategic Logistics. Donald didn't answer immediately, not because he doubted the words, because he respected them. Titles mattered less when they carried real responsibility. Thank you. I'll earn it. I know. The call ended. No celebration, no dramatic speech, just certainty. Donald exited the interstate and parked outside a modest Hampton Inn near Oak Brook. He had stayed there before during winter storms when commuting home became impossible. The receptionist recognized him. Long week, Donald smiled politely. You could say that. Room 417 overlooked the parking lot. Nothing luxurious. Gray carpet, simple furniture, 1 desk, 1 lamp, a coffee maker that probably hadn't been cleaned properly. Donald placed his suitcase beside the bed before opening the leather notebook he had carried home. The cover showed nearly 20 years of wear. It had belonged to his father. Inside were handwritten notes in blue ink, not memories, processes, checklists, observations. His father had owned a small machine repair shop in Rockford. He used to say one sentence repeatedly. If you write everything down, panic has nowhere to live. Donald had never forgotten. He opened to the final pages. Every meeting with Harrison Whitmore over the previous 18 months appeared in careful handwriting. Dates, locations, objectives, no confidential financial numbers, only operational ideas, warehouse redesign, distribution models, automation strategies, driver retention, supply chain resilience. Every conversation had been conducted quietly, sometimes inside airport lounges, sometimes over breakfast before sunrise, sometimes during charity events where neither man appeared to know the other. No photographs existed, no press coverage, exactly as Harrison preferred. 18 months earlier, Harrison had approached Donald after a logistics conference in Indianapolis. Not because Donald gave the loudest presentation, he hadn't presented anything. Donald had asked one thoughtful question during another executive's keynote speech. One question. That was enough. Later that afternoon, Harrison had introduced himself. "I've been looking for someone who notices systems instead of personalities." Donald remembered answering simply, "I notice both." The billionaire smiled. Good. Their first meeting lasted 32 minutes. The second lasted nearly 4 hours. By the third meeting, Harrison offered him something impossible: help build an entirely new logistics company from the shadows. No public role, no announcements, no salary increase, no executive title, only consulting agreements protected by strict confidentiality. Donald accepted. Not because of money, because the challenge interested him. For 18 months, he spent evenings reviewing warehouse layouts. Weekend flights disappeared from his calendar without explanation. Vacation days became strategy sessions. Every recommendation traveled through Harrison's legal team before reaching project managers. No one outside a handful of executives knew who had designed the operating system behind Whitmore Strategic Logistics. The company itself remained largely invisible, until now. Donald's laptop vibrated. An encrypted notification appeared. Activation package ready. He entered a 16-character password. Another screen appeared. Executive Employment Agreement. Chief Executive Officer. Whitmore Strategic Logistics. Annual compensation. Performance equity. Long-term ownership incentives. Board voting authority. Donald skipped directly to the legal obligations. He read every page, every clause, every appendix, every disclosure. Nearly 93 pages. Some executives would have signed immediately. Donald spent almost 2 hours reading. At 8:17 p.m., he finally signed electronically. Seconds later, another message appeared. "Welcome aboard, CEO Thomas." Then another. "Board approval confirmed." Another. "Corporate credentials activated." Another. "Security access granted." His old employee badge had stopped working that afternoon. A completely different digital identity now existed. Donald closed the laptop. Outside, rain began falling across the parking lot. He watched headlights reflect against wet pavement. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Owen Brooks, one of the few co-workers Donald genuinely respected. Donald answered. "I heard." Owen sounded exhausted. "They're already blaming you." Donald wasn't surprised. "For what?" "The warehouse software rollout." Donald almost smiled. "The rollout wasn't mine." "I know. But Victor says it was." Donald leaned back. "What happened after I left?" "They pulled everyone into conference room B." Owen hesitated. "Victor told us your management decisions caused the operational losses." Donald said nothing. "I wanted to say something. I didn't. I understand. I'm sorry." Donald looked out the window again. "You still have a job." "For now." "Then keep it." Owen lowered his voice. "Something isn't right. I've worked there 14 years. I've never seen people this nervous." Donald wrote 3 words inside his notebook. "Victor blamed me." He underlined them once. "Facts first, conclusions later." "Take care of yourself, Owen." "You too." The call ended. Donald turned off the lights shortly before midnight. Sleep came quickly, not because his life had become easier, because uncertainty had disappeared. At exactly 5:15 the next morning, his alarm sounded. The same time it had every weekday for nearly 15 years. Routine survived circumstances. He shaved, pressed a fresh navy suit, polished his shoes, prepared coffee using the small hotel machine despite its mediocre taste. At 6:28 a.m., another notification arrived. Vehicle waiting outside. Donald pulled back the curtain. A black Cadillac Escalade stood near the entrance. Two professionally dressed security officers waited beside it. Neither looked impatient. Donald carried only one suitcase. The younger officer opened the rear door. "Good morning, Mr. Thomas." Donald paused. No one had addressed him that way before. "Good morning." The drive into downtown Chicago felt different from the afternoon before. The skyline rose from the morning fog. Sunlight reflected across Lake Michigan. Rush hour traffic thickened. No one inside neighboring cars recognized him. To everyone else, he was another businessman heading into another workday. The Escalade turned away from the familiar financial district and entered the Fulton Market neighborhood. Modern brick buildings stood beside renovated industrial warehouses. Construction cranes filled the skyline. The vehicle stopped before a newly completed 12-story glass headquarters. No company logo hung above the entrance. Only polished stainless steel letters. Whitmore Strategic Logistics. Employees filled the lobby. Some carried laptops, others coffee cups. Conversation stopped the moment Donald stepped through the revolving door. Then something unexpected happened. Every person standing inside rose to their feet. A receptionist smiled warmly. "Welcome, Mr. Thomas." Across the lobby, Harrison Whitmore walked forward with his hand extended. "We've been waiting for you." Harrison Whitmore's handshake was firm but unhurried. "I hope you had breakfast." Donald smiled faintly. "Hotel coffee." "That isn't breakfast." Harrison laughed. "We'll fix that." The lobby of Whitmore Strategic Logistics felt different from every corporate headquarters Donald had entered during the past 20 years. No oversized executive portraits, no motivational slogans covering the walls, no polished speeches echoing through open spaces. Employees moved quickly but calmly. People greeted receptionists by name. Warehouse supervisors stood beside software engineers discussing shipping maps displayed across enormous digital screens. The atmosphere felt organized instead of theatrical. Donald appreciated that immediately. A young assistant approached carrying a leather portfolio. "Good morning, Mr. Thomas." She handed him a temporary executive access card. "Permanent credentials are still being encrypted." Donald nodded. "Thank you. Emily Parker," she introduced herself. "I'll coordinate your schedule." "Nice to meet you, Emily." She looked relieved. Apparently, she had expected someone far more intimidating. Harrison noticed. Everyone expected a loud CEO. Donald glanced toward him. "They'll be disappointed." "They'll be productive," Harrison answered. "That's better." The elevator opened onto the 12th floor. Glass walls overlooked downtown Chicago. Lake Michigan shimmered beneath the morning sunlight. Freight trains moved slowly through distant industrial districts. Hundreds of trucks appeared like tiny moving dots along Interstate 90. Donald studied the city for several quiet seconds. Every warehouse, every highway, every distribution center. He had spent 18 months designing systems that connected them. Now those plans belonged to reality. The boardroom doors opened. 12 directors stood around a long walnut table. No applause, only respectful attention. Harrison entered first. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to formally introduce your Chief Executive Officer, Donald Thomas." Every board member stood. Donald shook each hand individually. He listened carefully as names were introduced. Susan Keller, Chief Financial Officer. Daniel Reeves, Chief Technology Officer. Angela Morris, Vice President of Human Resources. Michael Jensen, National Operations Director. No one rushed the introductions. Donald appreciated that. People mattered before titles. After everyone sat down, Harrison spoke again. I'll keep this brief. For the past 18 months, many of you have been implementing recommendations from an anonymous strategic consultant. Several executives exchanged surprised looks. You've all worked with Donald. You simply didn't know his name. Silence filled the room. Michael Jensen leaned forward. Wait. The warehouse redesign in Indianapolis? Donald nodded. Yes. The Phoenix Automation Project? Yes. The driver retention program? Donald nodded again. The overtime restructuring? The regional routing algorithm? The predictive maintenance schedule? Donald answered each with the same calm response. Yes. Understanding spread across the room. Respect arrived naturally, not because of his title, because of his work. Harrison stepped aside. The floor is yours. Donald stood. He didn't walk to the head of the table. Instead, he remained beside his chair. I've read every department report submitted over the past 6 months. Several executives looked surprised again. I have 3 priorities. He lifted one finger. Safety. Another. Efficiency. A third. Trust. No company survives without all 3. No elaborate presentation followed. No inspirational quotes. Instead, Donald opened a simple folder. Our Dallas distribution center averages 22 minutes unloading incoming freight. He looked toward Michael. We're capable of 13. Michael blinked. How did you... I reviewed last week's security footage, Donald continued. Our Columbus warehouse loses nearly 7% of labor hours because forklift charging stations were installed on the wrong side of the building. Silence. Our Nevada fleet maintenance schedule wastes approximately 187 labor hours each month. More silence. Those aren't opinions. They're measurements. For the next hour, Donald walked through problem after problem, never blaming people, only identifying systems. When someone attempted to defend a department, Donald interrupted politely. I'm not looking for fault. I'm looking for friction. The room relaxed. Conversations became productive instead of defensive. By the meeting's conclusion, every executive carried handwritten notes. No one had checked a phone in nearly 90 minutes. Harrison smiled quietly. Exactly as he expected. Later that morning, Donald toured the headquarters. He stopped to introduce himself to receptionists, asked warehouse coordinators about their commute, learned security officers' names, complimented the cafeteria manager after tasting the coffee. One employee whispered to another, "He's actually listening." Donald heard it. He pretended he hadn't. Around noon, Emily approached again. The media relations team is asking whether you'd like interviews. Donald looked toward Harrison. The billionaire answered first. No, Emily nodded. What should I tell them? Donald replied calmly. Tell them we're working. Nothing more. By early afternoon, Donald visited the Operations Command Center. A massive digital wall displayed shipments crossing North America. Green lines represented trucks. Blue represented rail. Red highlighted delays. Donald stood silently for nearly 10 minutes. Not speaking, simply observing. Michael Jensen eventually joined him. What are you looking at? Donald pointed toward Colorado. That truck has been parked 32 minutes longer than scheduled. Michael frowned. You can tell from here. Donald nodded. The weather isn't causing it. The route isn't congested. So either the driver is sick, or the trailer paperwork is wrong. Michael contacted dispatch. 5 minutes later, the dispatcher called back. Incorrect customs documentation. The trailer had been stopped. Michael stared at Donald. You've been here less than 7 hours. Donald shrugged. The data tells the story. Late that afternoon, Harrison invited Donald into his private office. Bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Most contained biographies rather than business books. Harrison poured 2 cups of black coffee. You've exceeded my expectations. Donald accepted the mug. I've only attended meetings. No? You've changed the atmosphere. Harrison looked toward the hallway. Phew, people aren't afraid anymore. Donald considered that. They shouldn't be. Fear hides problems. A knock interrupted them. Emily stepped inside carrying a tablet. Sir, you asked me to monitor local business news. Harrison smiled. Let's see. She handed Donald the screen. A Chicago business publication had just posted an article. Major logistics firm appoints former operations executive as CEO. The photograph showed Donald leaving the headquarters earlier that afternoon. Simple navy suit, black briefcase. No smile. The article described him as an experienced but relatively unknown executive chosen by billionaire Harrison Whitmore to lead the company's national expansion. Donald handed the tablet back. That was quick. Chicago notices everything, Harrison replied, but it understands very little until later. At nearly the same moment, 30 miles away in Naperville, Luna sat inside an upscale wine bar across from Blake Sterling. Crystal glasses reflected candlelight between them. Blake checked a message on his phone before smiling. You look happier today. Luna laughed softly. I finally stopped worrying about Donald. She lifted her glass. He'll probably spend the next few months sending resumes. Blake nodded confidently. Some people are meant to follow. Outside the restaurant, another customer paused beside a newspaper stand. The afternoon business edition had just been delivered. Donald's photograph occupied nearly half of the front page. No one inside the restaurant had seen it yet. Back at headquarters, Emily knocked once more. The photographers from the Chicago Business Journal are downstairs. They're requesting one official photo outside the building. Donald looked toward Harrison. I thought we declined interviews. We did. They only want one photograph. Donald adjusted his jacket. One photograph. No statements. Minutes later, he stepped outside the headquarters. The afternoon sun reflected across the glass tower behind him. The photographer raised his camera. Mr. Thomas. Just look toward the entrance. Donald did. The shutter clicked several times. He had no idea that by sunrise the next morning the image would appear across newspapers, business websites, and television broadcasts throughout Chicago. Nor did he realize one person would see that photograph before anyone else. The photograph reached Luna Thomas before breakfast. She wasn't looking for it. It found her. At 7:18 the next morning, her phone vibrated while she stood in Blake Sterling's luxury condominium overlooking the Chicago River. She expected another social media notification. Instead, she saw 3 messages from friends. Did you see this? Is this Donald call me? Luna frowned and opened the first link. The headline appeared across the screen. Whitmore Strategic Logistics appoints Donald Thomas as Chief Executive Officer. She stared at the photograph. Navy suit, calm expression, glass headquarters behind him. Harrison Whitmore standing only a few feet away. For several seconds, she simply blinked. No. She refreshed the page. The article remained. She opened another website. Same story. Different photograph. A television interview clip had already been uploaded online. Donald never spoke. Only Harrison Whitmore. The board selected Donald because character is easier to trust than charisma. Luna replayed the sentence. Then again. Blake walked into the kitchen wearing a tailored robe carrying 2 cups of coffee. You look like you've seen a ghost. She silently handed him the phone. He scanned the article. His smile disappeared almost immediately. Harrison Whitmore. Yes. I thought your husband worked for Midwestern Freight Systems. He did. Blake continued reading. Apparently not anymore. Luna took the phone back. He never told me. Blake raised one eyebrow. Maybe he couldn't. She looked toward the floor. That possibility had never crossed her mind. Instead of embarrassment, another emotion appeared. Curiosity. Questions began multiplying inside her head. When? How? Why had Donald hidden this? How long had he known Blake interrupted her thoughts? It doesn't matter. He still got fired. He simply landed somewhere else. Luna wanted to believe him. She really did. But something felt wrong. Donald had never been lucky. Everything he achieved came through planning. She remembered countless evenings when he sat quietly in the home office, reviewing spreadsheets after dinner. She had assumed he was wasting time. Now she wondered what those evenings had actually been. Her phone rang again. This time it was Allison Monroe, one of her closest friends. Luna. I just watched CNBC. Your husband is everywhere. My ex-husband. Oh. A short silence followed. I didn't realize. Luna looked toward Blake. We're separating. Allison hesitated. The timing seems unfortunate. What do you mean? I mean, Donald doesn't exactly look unemployed. The words stung more than Luna expected. She ended the call after only a few minutes. Blake poured another cup of coffee. Forget them. People chase headlines. They'll move on tomorrow. Luna nodded absent-mindedly, yet she couldn't stop looking at Donald's photograph. His expression bothered her most. Not proud, not triumphant, simply calm. Exactly the same expression he had worn while carrying a cardboard box out of his old office. Almost as though both moments belonged to the same plan. That afternoon, Luna returned to the Naperville house. Donald had taken remarkably little. One closet remained nearly full. Most of the furniture stayed exactly where it had always been. His books still lined the office shelves. Engineering manuals, supply chain research, biographies of military leaders, legal reference books. She had teased him about those books for years. Who reads corporate law for fun? Donald never answered. Inside his desk drawer, she found neatly labeled folders. All empty. He had removed every important document, without disturbing anything else. No missing furniture. No broken dishes. No angry messages. Nothing. Only absence. She walked through the silent house. Every room reminded her of how quietly Donald had lived. He never slammed doors, never shouted, never demanded attention. She used to mistake that for weakness. Now she wasn't certain. The doorbell rang. Rachel Bennett stood outside wearing a charcoal business suit and carrying a slim leather briefcase. Mrs. Thomas. Yes. I'm Rachel Bennett. I represent Donald Thomas. Luna crossed her arms instinctively. What does Donald want? Rachel handed over a sealed envelope. Nothing today? This is simply formal notice. Luna opened it immediately. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Her eyes widened. He filed first, Rachel nodded. Yesterday evening. Impossible. He didn't even argue. Rachel remained perfectly professional. My client believes unnecessary conflict increases legal expenses. Luna almost laughed. That's exactly something Donald would say, Rachel continued. The filing also includes a mutual preservation request regarding all marital assets. Luna frowned. What does that mean? It means neither party may transfer, conceal, sell, or otherwise dispose of shared assets without disclosure. Luna looked confused. Rachel explained calmly. It's standard procedure. But my client prefers documentation to misunderstandings. Documentation. The word echoed strangely. Donald had always documented everything. Every bill, every receipt, every insurance renewal, every tax payment. She used to joke that he could probably produce a grocery receipt from 5 years ago. Now that habit suddenly felt much more significant. Rachel reached into her briefcase again. There is one additional matter. What? My client requests that all future communication occur through legal counsel. Luna looked genuinely surprised. He doesn't want to speak with me, Rachel answered honestly. He believes legal clarity benefits everyone. Nothing more, nothing less. Rachel left after only 10 minutes. No threats, no emotional speeches, only paperwork. That evening, Blake arrived carrying an expensive bottle of wine. He found Luna sitting quietly at the dining table. What happened? She slid the divorce petition across the table. Blake skimmed the first page. He moved fast. He always does. Blake smiled confidently. Good. You'll get a generous settlement. He just became CEO. Judges notice income. Luna looked uncertain. You think so? Absolutely. Blake leaned back comfortably. The house. The retirement accounts. His executive compensation. Half belongs to you. His confidence sounded reassuring, almost convincing. Luna wanted certainty. Blake provided plenty of it. The next morning, they met with a divorce attorney recommended by one of Blake's business associates. Martin Keller specialized in high-net-worth divorces. He adjusted his glasses while reviewing Donald's executive announcement. This certainly changes valuation. Luna smiled slightly. So I'll receive more. Martin didn't answer immediately. Possibly. What does that mean? It depends. On what? When the compensation was earned. Existing assets. Separate property. Restricted equity. Executive agreements. He closed the folder. We'll request complete financial disclosure, Blake interrupted confidently. Donald's straightforward. He'll cooperate. Martin looked towards Blake. I've handled thousands of divorce cases. The people who appear quiet usually maintain the best records. Luna shifted uncomfortably. Donald maintained records of everything. She knew that better than anyone. Later that afternoon, Rachel Bennett sat across from Donald inside a conference room at Whitmore headquarters. She placed several folders onto the table. I've reviewed everything. Donald waited. You weren't exaggerating. I rarely do. Rachel smiled faintly. I noticed. She opened the first folder. Your financial documentation is exceptional. Donald nodded. My father taught me. Every account reconciled. Every investment documented. Every tax return indexed. Every insurance policy archived. She paused. I've never seen anything this organized. Donald answered simply. I dislike uncertainty. Rachel slid another document forward. There is something else. What? She pointed toward several banking records. I noticed unusual activity. Donald examined the dates. Large electronic transfers, joint account, several weeks earlier, amounts just below automatic reporting thresholds. He looked up. I didn't authorize these. I know. Rachel folded her hands. I think someone assumed you would never notice. Donald remained silent for several long seconds. Finally, he opened the leather notebook his father had given him. He wrote only one sentence, unusual transfers before separation. Then he closed the notebook. Rachel watched him carefully. No questions. Not yet. No accusations. Not until we know the facts. Rachel leaned back in her chair. For the first time since accepting Donald as a client, she fully understood why Harrison Whitmore had trusted him with an entire company. Donald Thomas never reacted first. He collected evidence. Only then did he decide what truth actually looked like. Rachel slowly reached into the final folder. I've already hired a forensic accountant. Donald looked up. What did they find? Donald looked across the conference table without reaching for the folder. What did they find? Rachel Bennett slid several printed spreadsheets toward him. The transfers total $183,000. Donald lowered his eyes to the first page. Each transaction had been highlighted in yellow. The amounts varied. $9,000, $8,500, $9,800, always below $10,000. always transferred from a joint account, always scheduled within days of one another. They weren't random, Rachel said. They were structured. Donald examined every date. 3 weeks before his termination, 2 weeks before, 5 days before, 1 day before. Every transfer occurred while he had been traveling for meetings with Harrison Whitmore. He quietly opened his notebook. Under the previous entry, he wrote another sentence. Transfers timed during business travel. Rachel watched him. You still aren't angry. Donald capped his pen. Anger changes nothing. Evidence changes everything. Rachel nodded. I thought you'd say that. She opened another folder. The money didn't disappear. It moved. Where? Several shell investment accounts. Donald looked at the ownership records. Most were registered through legitimate financial institutions. Nothing illegal about them, at least not immediately. What links them? He asked. Rachel placed another page on top. The beneficiary addresses. Donald read carefully. Every mailing address eventually pointed toward companies connected to Blake Sterling. Not directly. Through holding companies, limited liability corporations, commercial property partnerships. Layers. Whoever designed the transfers expected no one to trace them. Rachel leaned forward. Our forensic accountant spent 18 hours connecting these entities. Donald closed the folder. Good work. There is more. She hesitated briefly. We obtained copies of credit card statements. Donald looked up. I never reviewed Luna's monthly charges. I know. Rachel slid forward another stack. Luxury boutiques, designer jewelry, private club memberships, weekend resorts, expensive restaurants. Several purchases occurred while Donald believed Luna was visiting friends. Instead, hotel invoices placed her downtown, near Blake Sterling's condominium. Donald remained expressionless. Rachel studied him carefully. You already suspected. I noticed patterns. Not conclusions. He flipped through another page. One receipt caught his attention. The purchase date matched an evening 18 days earlier. He remembered working late, reviewing warehouse simulations for Harrison. Luna had texted him. Having dinner with Allison? Take your time. Donald wrote another note. Dinner location inconsistent. Again. No accusations. Only facts. Rachel folded her hands. I've represented executives for 23 years. Most clients want revenge? What do you want? Donald looked toward the window overlooking Lake Michigan. I want accuracy. Rachel smiled faintly. That makes my job easier. Later that afternoon, Donald walked through the operations center. Employees greeted him naturally now, not because he was the CEO, because he remembered names. A warehouse supervisor approached. Mr. Thomas. We reduced loading time by 4 minutes. Donald reviewed the performance dashboard. Good. What caused the improvement? We moved inspection stations. Donald nodded. Measure it for another week. If the numbers remained stable, implement nationally. The supervisor left, smiling. Michael Jensen walked beside him. You trust people quickly. Donald shook his head. I trust measurements. People earn trust by repeating them. His phone vibrated. Rachel. He answered immediately. We found surveillance footage. From where? The private bank. Donald stopped walking. Rachel continued. The branch keeps exterior security recordings for 90 days. The transfers were initiated inside. Can you identify the person? Not clearly. But we can identify the vehicle. Donald waited. A black Range Rover. Registered to Sterling Development Group. Donald remained silent. Would you like me to obtain the footage? Yes. Chain of custody. Already documented. Donald smiled slightly. I knew you'd think of that. That evening, Rachel met the forensic accountant, Brian Foster, inside a secure records room. Stacks of financial documents covered the conference table. Brian pointed toward a timeline stretching across an entire wall. Look at the sequence. Rachel studied it. Transfers, credit card purchases, corporate travel, dinner reservations, vehicle locations. Everything aligned. Brian circled one date. This interests me. Rachel leaned closer. What happened? Donald received termination notice at 2:05 p.m. Correct. The final transfer occurred at 2:19. Rachel looked back at him. 14 minutes later. Brian nodded. Someone already knew he was fired. Neither spoke for several seconds. Rachel finally said the obvious. Human resources couldn't have processed that information publicly in 14 minutes. Brian agreed. Someone called ahead. Meanwhile, inside Sterling Development Group's luxury office overlooking Michigan Avenue, Blake Sterling poured himself a glass of expensive bourbon. Luna stood beside the windows. Martin says we'll request Donald's executive compensation. Blake nodded. Good. He owes you. Luna didn't answer. Her thoughts remained somewhere else. Donald had never once called, never sent an angry message, never begged, never asked where she had gone. The silence disturbed her more each day. Blake noticed. You aren't feeling guilty, are you? She forced a smile. No. I just don't understand him anymore. Blake laughed. That's because you're overthinking. He'll settle. They always settle. Luna wanted to believe him. Instead, she remembered something Donald once said years earlier, after helping his father organize tax records. People panic because they stop keeping track. At the time, she thought it sounded boring. Now she wondered if Donald had spent years quietly preparing for disasters no one else expected. The following morning, Rachel arrived at Cook County Circuit Court to file additional discovery requests. Martin Keller noticed her across the hallway. Busy week. Rachel smiled professionally. It usually is. Martin adjusted his briefcase. My client hopes this can remain civil. So does mine. Neither attorney discussed strategy. Both understood discovery would decide the case long before trial. Inside the clerk's office, Rachel filed motions, requesting complete disclosure of financial accounts, business interests, investment partnerships, vehicle ownership, electronic communications related to joint finances, and banking records. Every request relied upon documented discrepancies. Nothing speculative, nothing exaggerated. Facts. Later that afternoon, Donald attended his first executive planning session with regional managers from 6 states. Instead of speaking first, he listened. Warehouse shortages, fuel costs, driver turnover, weather delays. Every manager described problems. Donald filled 3 notebook pages. Only after everyone finished did he respond. We're solving too many symptoms. He walked toward the digital map. Our Kansas City hub overloads because St. Louis dispatches freight 12 hours too early. He pointed again. Indianapolis waits because Memphis schedules maintenance every Thursday. Another point. Phoenix loses drivers because overnight parking is unsafe. No one interrupted. Donald continued calmly. Fix causes. Symptoms disappear. The room fell silent. Several managers exchanged surprised looks. One finally spoke. We've discussed these problems for years. Donald nodded. You discussed outcomes. We're discussing systems. When the meeting ended, Harrison Whitmore entered quietly. I heard it went well. Donald closed his notebook. People already knew the answers. They simply hadn't connected them. Harrison smiled. The same reason I hired you. Donald's phone vibrated once again. Rachel. I have good news. What is it? The judge signed every discovery request. And the bank has released the surveillance recordings. Donald looked through the office window toward the Chicago skyline. When can we review them? Rachel answered immediately. Tomorrow morning. She paused before adding one final sentence. I have a feeling this case is about to become much bigger than a divorce. Rachel Bennett arrived at Donald's office carrying a slim black laptop instead of another stack of paper folders. I thought you'd want to see this yourself. Donald closed the operations report he had been reviewing. The surveillance footage? Rachel nodded. The bank released everything. She connected the laptop to the conference room monitor. The screen displayed a quiet suburban bank branch in Naperville. Timestamp, September 18th, 10:14 a.m. Customers entered and exited without urgency. A woman wearing sunglasses stepped through the front doors. Donald immediately recognized Luna. Not because of her face, because of the tan designer handbag she carried almost every day. Rachel paused the recording. The image quality inside isn't clear enough to show paperwork. But keep watching. The video resumed. Luna approached a private banking office. Exactly 3 minutes later, another figure entered through the side entrance. Blake Sterling. He wasn't wearing sunglasses. He walked confidently toward the same office. Donald leaned slightly forward. They arrived separately. Rachel nodded. Yes. Watch the timestamps. Blake remained inside for 19 minutes. Luna exited first. She looked around the parking lot before walking toward her vehicle. 3 minutes later, Blake left, carrying nothing visible. Rachel stopped the recording. Now look at this. She opened another window. Bank transfer records. 10:37 a.m. electronic transfer, $9,600. Joint account. Donald compared the timestamps. Luna exited at 10:36. The transfer executed 1 minute later. Rachel continued. We checked 4 additional dates. The pattern never changes. Donald remained silent. His attention wasn't focused on the money anymore. It was focused on preparation. Someone had planned these meetings carefully. Someone believed timing would hide everything. Rachel spoke again. Our forensic accountant believes the transfers were intentionally structured to avoid attracting internal review. Donald nodded once. It wasn't impulsive. No. It was organized. Rachel looked at him carefully. You're thinking about something else. Donald closed the laptop. They underestimated documentation? Rachel smiled. They underestimated you. Later that afternoon, Donald walked through the main operations floor. Employees gathered around digital freight maps. Phone conversations blended with keyboard clicks. Forklift cameras streamed live footage from distribution centers across the country. Nothing about the atmosphere suggested the company had a brand new CEO. That pleased Donald. Organizations functioned best when work remained more important than leadership. Emily Parker approached carrying a tablet. Mr. Thomas, the quarterly warehouse review is ready. Donald accepted it. Thank you. She hesitated. Can I ask something? Of course. Were you really consulting for Whitmore before becoming CEO? Donald considered the question. I helped solve operational problems. For how long? A while. Emily smiled. I heard people say you appeared out of nowhere. Donald returned the tablet. No one appears out of nowhere. People simply don't see the preparation. Emily quietly repeated those words after walking away. No one appears out of nowhere. Meanwhile, nearly 15 miles away, another conversation unfolded inside Midwestern Freight Systems. Victor Langford slammed a folder onto the executive conference table. Who spoke to investigators? No one answered. The senior leadership team avoided eye contact. Victor looked toward Melissa Grant. You oversee compliance. I asked who talked. Melissa remained calm. Federal investigators requested records. We're legally obligated to cooperate. Victor's jaw tightened. I didn't ask for cooperation. I asked for loyalty. Melissa answered without changing her expression. Our loyalty belongs to the law. Silence spread across the room. Victor looked away first. He knew arguing with compliance rarely ended well. After the meeting, Melissa returned to her office. She locked the door before opening a secure cabinet. Inside rested 3 archive boxes. Each contained printed emails, internal audit reports, warehouse inspections, budget revisions, documents she had quietly preserved for months. She remembered the day Donald had been dismissed. Everyone else panicked. Donald simply picked up his notebook. That image refused to leave her memory. She reached for her phone. One number had been sitting in her contacts for years. Owen Brooks. He answered on the second ring. "Melissa, we need to talk. I was hoping you'd call." They agreed to meet after work at a small coffee shop away from downtown. Neither trusted company telephones anymore. That evening, Owen arrived first. Melissa sat near the back corner. She slid a sealed envelope across the table. "What is this? Copies? Of what?" "Executive emails." Owen opened the envelope carefully. His eyes widened. Victor Langford, Chief Financial Officer Stephen Miles, Vice President Karen Doyle, dozens of internal communications. One subject line immediately caught his attention: operational failure narrative. Owen looked back up. "What is this?" Melissa answered quietly. "Read page 3. He did. Victor's words appeared in plain text. "Need one accountable executive before the board meeting. Thomas is expendable." Owen stopped reading. "He knew." Melissa nodded. "He always knew." Owen looked around the coffee shop instinctively. "Does Donald know?" "Not yet, but he should." Across town, Donald finished another strategy meeting before returning to his office. The building had grown quiet. Most employees had already gone home. Only cleaning crews and a handful of analysts remained. Harrison Whitmore knocked once before entering. "You still here?" Donald smiled. "So are you." Harrison laughed. "Fair enough." He sat opposite Donald. "How's the divorce?" Donald considered the question. "Predictable." "The company?" "Less predictable, but improving." Harrison studied him. "You know what impresses me most?" Donald waited. "You haven't allowed personal problems to become corporate problems." Donald looked towards the skyline. "My employees didn't choose my marriage." "They deserve my full attention." Harrison nodded approvingly. "That's leadership." Before Donald could answer, Emily stepped into the office. "Sorry to interrupt. Mr. Brooks is downstairs." Donald looked surprised. "Owen?" "Yes. He says it's important." "Send him up." 5 minutes later, Owen entered, carrying a brown envelope. His face looked exhausted. "I shouldn't be here." Donald stood. "You came anyway." Owen nodded. "I owe you." He placed the envelope onto the desk. Donald didn't open it immediately. "What is it?" "Internal emails." Melissa Grant copied them. Donald looked at the envelope for several seconds. "You've read them. Enough. They blamed you before the investigation even started." Donald finally opened the seal. The first document appeared: Operational Failure Narrative. His eyes moved slowly across the page. Every sentence revealed careful planning, not operational planning, political planning. Someone needed a public scapegoat. Someone needed shareholders to believe leadership remained in control. Someone needed Donald. He finished the final page, closed the folder, then quietly opened his notebook. He wrote one sentence: "Narrative created before evidence. Nothing more." Owen stared at him. "That's all." Donald closed the notebook. "Facts first. The rest comes later." Owen shook his head. "I don't know how you stay this calm." Donald looked toward the dark Chicago skyline. "My father used to tell me something. When people are lying, never interrupt them." They eventually build the evidence against themselves, Rachel called moments later. I've just spoken with the federal investigators. Donald listened carefully. They've officially requested interviews with several former executives. She paused. And Melissa Grant has agreed to cooperate. Donald slowly looked down at the envelope Owen had delivered. For the first time since losing his job, the pieces no longer looked separate. They were beginning to connect into one complete picture. And someone inside Midwestern Freight Systems had just decided to tell the truth. Blake Sterling disappeared on a Monday morning. No announcement, no explanation, just silence. Luna arrived at his downtown condominium shortly after 9, carrying breakfast from the cafe he liked. The concierge looked uncomfortable the moment she stepped into the lobby. Good morning, Miss Thomas. I'm here to see Blake. The concierge hesitated. Mr. Sterling checked out yesterday. Luna frowned. Checked out? He removed his personal belongings. When will he be back? I'm afraid I don't know. She stared at him. There has to be some mistake. There isn't. The concierge lowered his voice. His office sent movers yesterday afternoon. Luna stood motionless for several seconds. She called Blake, straight to voicemail. She called again. The same recording. She sent a message. No reply. Another. Still nothing. The elevator doors opened behind her, but she didn't move. For the first time since leaving Donald, uncertainty settled into her stomach. She drove directly to Sterling Development Group. The reception area looked different from only a week earlier. Several desks were empty. A television that usually displayed luxury condominium projects had been turned off. The receptionist recognized her immediately. I'm sorry, Miss Thomas. Mr. Sterling isn't available. I'll wait. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Then tell him I'm here. The receptionist looked genuinely sympathetic. He hasn't been here since Friday. Luna crossed her arms. When is he coming back? I honestly don't know. Before Luna could respond, 2 men wearing dark business suits stepped through the revolving doors carrying leather briefcases. Neither smiled. Neither checked in at reception. One simply displayed an identification wallet. The receptionist nodded nervously and pointed toward the executive elevators. Luna watched them disappear upstairs. Something wasn't right. 10 minutes later, several employees emerged carrying cardboard boxes. No one spoke. No one made eye contact. She stopped one young accountant near the exit. What's happening? He hesitated. I probably shouldn't. It's about Blake. The accountant sighed. Our lenders suspended funding. For everything. I don't know. But payroll was delayed. He lowered his voice. Several projects have stopped. Then he quickly walked away. Luna stood alone in the lobby. The expensive marble floors suddenly felt cold beneath her feet. Across the city, Donald Thomas had just finished reviewing transportation metrics from 6 regional distribution centers. Michael Jensen entered carrying a folder. Our Detroit facility exceeded expectations. Donald examined the report. Good. What changed? We followed your recommendation. The maintenance schedule. Michael nodded. Equipment downtime dropped 23%. Donald smiled slightly. Share the process nationally. Michael remained standing. You've barely mentioned your former company. Donald looked up. I work here now. I know. But everyone else keeps talking about them. Donald closed the report. Talking won't improve our operations. Michael laughed softly. I keep forgetting. You really don't waste energy. Donald returned to work. Energy belonged to problems that could still be solved. His phone buzzed. Rachel Bennett. Good morning. I've received another report. Donald leaned back. What happened? The forensic accountant traced more transfers. Donald listened carefully. This time they weren't moving money. They were moving debt. What kind? Personal guarantees. Donald frowned. Rachel continued. It appears Blake convinced Luna to guarantee several investment loans using future marital assets. Donald remained silent. Can she legally do that? That's exactly what we're investigating. Rachel paused. And Donald? Yes. I don't think she understood what she was signing. He looked toward the skyline. I expected as much. Later that afternoon, Rachel met Brian Foster inside his accounting office. Large monitors displayed interconnected financial charts. Colored lines connected companies, properties, loans, and ownership interests. Brian pointed toward a cluster of entities. Look here. Rachel stepped closer. Sterling Development Holdings. Sterling Residential Partners. Lakefront Urban Investments. All connected? Brian zoomed in further. Most projects were financed using borrowed equity. So if property values decline, Rachel finished the sentence. Everything collapses. Brian nodded. Exactly. He clicked another file. This concerns me more. Rachel read carefully. Multiple lenders had already issued default notices. Dates, amounts, collateral. The timeline accelerated dramatically over the previous month. He knew, Rachel whispered. Brian looked up. I think Blake understood his empire was failing long before he met Luna. Rachel slowly closed the file. He wasn't searching for a partner. He was searching for leverage. Meanwhile, Luna finally reached Martin Keller. I can't find Blake. Martin sounded unusually serious. I was about to call you. What happened? I've received notice from opposing counsel. What notice? They're requesting disclosure regarding several financial guarantees. Luna felt her heartbeat quicken. I signed investment paperwork. Blake said it was routine. Martin remained quiet for several seconds. Did you read everything? She hesitated. Not every page. Martin sighed. I need copies. I don't have them. Then we need to find them immediately. Luna looked out through her windshield. Chicago traffic flowed around her. For the first time in years, she realized how many financial decisions she had made simply because someone confident told her everything would be fine. Donald had always read every page, every contract, every insurance renewal, every mortgage statement. She used to laugh at how long it took him to sign anything. Now she wished she had inherited just a little of that patience. Late that evening, Donald visited one of Whitmore's regional distribution centers outside Joliet. He walked through loading docks, wearing a reflective safety vest instead of a tailored jacket. Forklifts moved quietly between trailers. Drivers checked cargo seals. Maintenance crews inspected braking systems. Donald stopped beside an older warehouse employee, repairing a damaged pallet jack. How long have you worked here? 28 years. What slows you down most? The man pointed toward the opposite end of the warehouse. Replacement parts. They're stored too far away. Donald measured the walking distance with his eyes. Nearly 300 feet. Small inconvenience, repeated hundreds of times each day. He wrote another note. Move maintenance inventory. The supervisor approached. Mr. Thomas? We weren't expecting a CEO. Donald smiled. You weren't expecting someone who likes warehouses. The supervisor laughed. Most executives don't come out here? They stay in conference rooms. Donald looked around the building. The work happens here. Conference rooms only describe it. As he prepared to leave, Emily called. Mr. Thomas. Rachel Bennett is on line 2. Donald answered immediately. What happened? Rachel sounded calm. I received notice from Sterling Development's primary lender. Donald waited. They've begun foreclosure proceedings against 3 commercial properties. So it starts. Yes. And there is one more development. What is it? Blake Sterling's attorneys have requested copies of every financial transaction involving Luna. Donald remained silent. Rachel understood what that silence meant. You think he's preparing a defense? I think, Donald replied quietly, he's preparing to blame someone else. Rachel looked at the growing stack of documents covering her desk. The same pattern appeared again. Victor Langford blamed Donald. Now Blake Sterling appeared ready to blame Luna. Different industries, different people, the same instinct. Find someone else to stand in front of the consequences. Donald ended the call and looked back across the warehouse floor. Employees continued working without knowing anything about lawsuits, divorces, investigations, or collapsing real estate companies. He preferred it that way. Leadership was supposed to absorb chaos, not distribute it. His phone vibrated one last time before midnight. The message came from Rachel. Court hearing confirmed. Discovery begins Thursday. Donald read it once, then opened his notebook. He wrote only 4 words. Truth moves on schedule. He closed the notebook. Somewhere across the city, Luna was still searching for Blake. Donald was preparing for court. Thursday morning arrived with cold rain over downtown Chicago. Donald parked beneath the Cook County Courthouse 15 minutes early. Not because he expected delays, because arriving late had never solved a single problem in his life. Rachel Bennett met him inside the security entrance. She carried 3 organized binders, blue, gray, black, each tabbed with color-coded labels. Donald noticed the order immediately. You reorganized everything. Rachel smiled. I learned from my client. They entered courtroom 6B together. The room was smaller than Donald expected. Dark wooden benches, American flag beside the judge's bench. 2 court reporters preparing equipment. Nothing dramatic. No television cameras. Real legal work rarely looked like television. Martin Keller was already seated with Luna. She looked tired. Her expensive clothing remained immaculate, but exhaustion showed beneath her eyes. Donald noticed something else. Blake Sterling was nowhere in sight. Martin approached Rachel before the hearing began. My client has no objection to exchanging financial disclosures today. Rachel nodded. Neither does mine. Professional, measured. Neither attorney wasted words. Judge Eleanor Watkins entered promptly at 9. Everyone stood. The hearing began with routine scheduling matters. Discovery deadlines, document production, future depositions. Then Martin rose. Your Honor, my client requests temporary financial support based upon Mr. Thomas's new executive compensation. Rachel stood immediately afterward. We object. Judge Watkins looked toward her. On what grounds? Rachel opened the blue binder. Compensation has not yet vested. Furthermore, evidence suggests substantial marital funds may already have been transferred without my client's authorization. Martin looked surprised. Judge Watkins adjusted her glasses. Evidence. Rachel handed several exhibits to the clerk. Bank records, transfer summaries, transaction timelines. Nothing emotional, nothing speculative, only documents. The judge reviewed the first pages silently. Martin frowned. We have not yet examined these, Rachel answered calmly. They were disclosed yesterday according to procedural rules. Judge Watkins continued reading. Finally, she looked toward Luna. Mrs. Thomas, were these transfers authorized by your husband? Luna hesitated. Martin placed one hand gently on the table. Your Honor, I advise my client not to speculate until all records are reviewed. Judge Watkins nodded. Fair. She turned another page. There appears to be a significant amount involved. Rachel remained standing. $183,000, Your Honor. Donald said nothing. He never looked toward Luna. He simply watched the judge evaluate the documents. Facts carried more weight without interruption. After reviewing several additional exhibits, Judge Watkins issued temporary orders. No temporary support, full financial discovery, mandatory disclosure of every investment account, personal guarantees, corporate interests, electronic banking records. Martin quietly wrote notes. Rachel closed her binder. Phase 1 had gone exactly as planned. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited in the hallway. Not many. Only local legal correspondents. One microphone briefly extended toward Donald. Mr. Thomas. Any comment regarding today's hearing? Donald paused only long enough to answer politely. The court deserves complete information. Nothing more. He continued walking. No accusations, no interviews, no dramatic speeches. One reporter turned toward another. He never takes the bait. Rachel heard the comment. She smiled quietly. That afternoon, Martin Keller sat alone inside his office, reviewing the financial disclosures Donald had produced. The file seemed endless. Tax returns, investment statements, retirement accounts, property records, insurance policies, every document professionally indexed, every page numbered, every transaction cross-referenced. Martin leaned back. This man documented everything. His assistant entered. The disclosures from Mrs. Thomas arrived. Martin accepted the second box. Much thinner. He opened it. Several missing statements, incomplete investment summaries, unsigned copies. No supporting documentation from multiple financial guarantees. Martin removed his glasses. This wasn't good. Not good at all. Meanwhile, Rachel and Brian Foster met again. Brian projected another timeline across the conference room wall. I've confirmed something important. Rachel looked up. What? The loan guarantees Luna signed. Were they legal? Mostly. Rachel waited. But they referenced assets she didn't actually control. Brian enlarged one contract. The collateral description included future executive compensation from Donald's employment. Rachel frowned. That compensation didn't exist yet. Exactly. Brian clicked another page. The documents estimated Donald would remain unemployed for at least 12 months. Rachel looked surprised. They predicted his future income. They assumed there wouldn't be any. Silence filled the room. Brian finally spoke. Someone built an entire financial strategy around Donald staying broken. Across town, Luna returned to the nearly empty house in Naperville. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The silence felt heavier each day. She walked into Donald's former office again. This time she noticed something she had ignored before. Every bookshelf remained alphabetized. Every file drawer labeled. Even the pencils inside his desk had been arranged by size. She sat quietly in his old chair. For years, she mocked those habits. You organize things no one cares about. Donald usually smiled. One day I might. She opened the bottom drawer. Empty. Except for one small index card. Not hidden. Simply forgotten. On it, Donald had written a quote in blue ink. Discipline is remembering what matters before it becomes urgent. No signature, no date. She read it twice. Then carefully placed the card back inside the drawer. For reasons she couldn't explain, tears finally came. Not because of money, not because of Blake, because she suddenly realized how many quiet warnings she had dismissed over the years. Donald had never tried to control her. He had simply tried to prepare for tomorrow. She had mistaken preparation for fear. That evening, Donald attended a leadership dinner hosted by Harrison Whitmore. Only 8 executives were invited. The restaurant overlooked the Chicago River. No reporters, no speeches, just conversation. Halfway through dinner, Harrison raised his glass. To steady hands. Everyone smiled. One vice president asked Donald a question. Can I ask something personal? Donald nodded. When your career collapsed, how did you stay calm? The table grew quiet. Donald thought for a moment. My father repaired industrial machinery. Several executives leaned in. He used to say broken equipment tells the truth. You only need enough patience to hear it. He took another sip of water. The same applies to people. When everything falls apart, some pay attention. They'll tell you exactly who they are. No one spoke for several seconds. The answer felt too simple, which made it difficult to forget. After dinner, Donald returned to headquarters. Emily was still working. You should go home. She laughed. I was about to. She hesitated. There is something else. She handed Donald a sealed overnight envelope. No return address. Donald examined it carefully. Professional courier, hand-delivered. He opened it inside his office. Only one document rested inside. A photocopy, no letter, no explanation. Just one page from an internal Midwestern Freight Systems executive meeting. At the bottom appeared Victor Langford's signature. Above it, one sentence had been highlighted. Proceed with Thomas termination before external audit expands. Donald stared at the page. Rachel had already shown him evidence that he had been selected as the scapegoat. This document changed something important. Timing. His dismissal hadn't followed the audit. It had preceded it intentionally. Someone wanted him gone before investigators looked deeper. His phone rang. Rachel. I assume you've opened the envelope? You sent it? No. Then who did? Rachel answered quietly. Melissa Grant. She resigned today. Donald looked again at the highlighted sentence. Where is she now? Federal investigators picked her up this afternoon. They've placed her under witness protection procedures until formal interviews begin. Donald slowly lowered the paper onto his desk. Witness protection. The situation had become much larger than corporate politics. Rachel spoke one final sentence before ending the call. Donald, the government now believes someone destroyed evidence after you were fired. 3 days after the first court hearing, the divorce case stopped being the biggest legal problem surrounding Luna Thomas. Federal investigators arrived instead, not at her house, at Martin Keller's office. 2 investigators from the Department of Justice requested a voluntary interview. Martin welcomed them into the conference room before turning toward Luna. You don't have to answer every question. One investigator, Special Agent Rebecca Collins, placed her credentials on the table. We're not here to accuse you of anything. We're trying to establish a timeline. Luna nodded nervously. I understand. Rebecca opened a thin file. When did you first meet Blake Sterling? About 9 months ago. Who introduced you? A charity fundraiser. Were you already experiencing problems in your marriage? Luna hesitated. Yes. Rebecca wrote a brief note. When did financial discussions begin? Luna frowned. I don't remember exactly. Try. It was after Donald lost his job. Another note. Rebecca looked up. Before or after? Luna blinked. What? Before or after Mr. Thomas officially lost his position? Luna searched her memory. Dinner, drinks, Blake talking confidently about investments, promises, future opportunities. She suddenly froze. It was... Rebecca waited patiently. It was before. The room became silent. Martin slowly lowered his pen. Rebecca asked another question. So, Blake discussed Donald's unemployment before it actually happened. Luna's heartbeat accelerated. I think so. You think? She closed her eyes. Then she remembered. Blake had smiled across the restaurant table. Your husband won't be tied down much longer. At the time, she thought he meant Donald deserved something better. Now the sentence sounded completely different. Across Chicago, Donald sat with Rachel reviewing preparations for upcoming depositions. She looked up from her notes. The government interviewed Luna this morning. Donald didn't appear surprised. How did it go? We don't know. But Rebecca Collins requested copies of our financial timeline. Donald nodded. Send everything. Rachel smiled. I already have. She pushed another folder toward him. There's something you'll want to see. Donald opened it. Copies of internal emails, calendar invitations, visitor logs, parking garage records. Rachel pointed toward one highlighted date. The afternoon before your termination. Donald studied the entries. Victor Langford, Blake Sterling, private dinner, same hotel, same evening. Donald looked at Rachel. They knew each other. We can prove they met. Can we prove why? Not yet. Donald closed the folder. Then we wait. Rachel laughed quietly. I've never met anyone more comfortable waiting. My father repaired conveyor systems, Donald answered without looking up. If you replace the wrong part too early, you create a bigger failure. Meanwhile, Victor Langford entered the headquarters of Midwestern Freight Systems under unusually heavy tension. 2 federal subpoenas had already arrived. Outside counsel occupied an entire conference room. Employees whispered as he walked through the building. Respect had quietly transformed into suspicion. Stephen Miles caught up with him. We have another problem. Victor didn't slow down. What now? Melissa Grant turned over archived emails. Victor stopped walking. How many? We don't know. Stephen lowered his voice. But enough for investigators to request backup servers. Victor closed his office door harder than intended. For the first time in years, confidence abandoned him. He called legal counsel immediately. No answer. He called Blake Sterling. Disconnected. Again, disconnected. Victor stared at the phone. 2 allies had disappeared within the same week. That wasn't coincidence. It was survival. Late that afternoon, Donald visited his father's grave outside Aurora. The cemetery overlooked a quiet stretch of trees, moving gently in the autumn wind. He carried no flowers, only the old leather notebook. He stood silently for several minutes. No speeches, no dramatic emotion. Just quiet reflection. He finally opened the notebook. The first page still contained his father's handwriting. Measure twice. Move once. Donald smiled faintly. So far? I listened. Wind moved softly across the grass. His phone vibrated. Rachel. They found the deleted files, Donald answered calmly. Recovered. Almost all of them. From Midwestern. Yes. Rachel paused. Someone attempted to erase executive communications the night after your termination. Donald looked towards the headstone. They panicked. Exactly. And panic leaves fingerprints. That evening, Harrison Whitmore invited Donald to his office. The top floor overlooked nearly the entire city. You've been distracted. Donald didn't deny it. A little. Harrison poured 2 glasses of sparkling water. I know enough to avoid asking about confidential legal matters. Donald accepted the glass. Thank you. But I do want to ask something. Donald waited. Why haven't you publicly defended yourself? The media would love it. Donald looked out through the windows. Public opinion changes every day. Court records don't. Harrison smiled. That's exactly why I hired you. He leaned back. When I was 32, I almost lost this company. Donald looked surprised. I've never heard that story. Very few people have. Harrison walked toward an old framed photograph hanging beside the bookshelf. A competitor accused us of fraud. Were they right? No. So, why didn't you fight publicly? Harrison smiled. My attorney told me something. He looked directly at Donald. If your evidence is strong. Silence becomes expensive for the other side. Donald nodded slowly. Smart attorney. The best. The conversation ended there. Neither man needed to say more. Across town, Luna finally entered the nearly abandoned offices of Sterling Development after receiving a message from one remaining project manager. The once busy headquarters echoed with emptiness. Conference rooms stood dark. Boxes lined the hallways. Computer monitors had disappeared. Only a handful of employees remained. The project manager handed her a sealed envelope. Blake asked accounting to destroy these. I couldn't. Luna looked confused. What is it? I think you should give them to your attorney. She opened the envelope anyway. Photocopies, loan agreements, internal memos, one handwritten note. Her hands began shaking. The note was unmistakably Blake's handwriting. Need Donald terminated before divorce finalized. Assets easier to leverage afterward. Luna stared at the sentence. She read it again. Then again. Every excuse she had believed over the past year collapsed inside a few seconds. Blake hadn't fallen in love with her. He had studied her. He hadn't rescued her from a failing marriage. He had identified an opportunity. She suddenly remembered every conversation, every expensive gift, every promise, every suggestion that Donald was holding her back. Each now sounded rehearsed. She folded the paper carefully. For the first time since leaving Donald, she stopped asking herself whether she had made a mistake. The real question had become much worse. How long had she been manipulated? At nearly the same moment, Rachel received a secure email from Special Agent Rebecca Collins. Only 4 words appeared in the message. We need Donald tomorrow. Rachel called immediately. They want to interview you. Donald nodded. I expected that. They also requested your notebook. Donald looked toward the leather cover resting beside his desk. My notebook. They've heard about it. Donald picked it up. Years of observations, dates, conversations, measurements. Nothing dramatic. Only disciplined records collected 1 page at a time. Rachel asked quietly, Will you give it to them? Donald ran one hand across the worn leather. My father gave me this. I know. But it may become the most important piece of evidence in the entire investigation. Donald closed the notebook gently, then looked out toward the lights of Chicago. Tomorrow, for the first time, someone outside his legal team would finally read everything he had quietly recorded long before anyone believed his silence mattered. Donald arrived at the federal building just before 8 o'clock. The interview room surprised him. No bright lights, no intimidation, only a rectangular wooden table, 3 chairs, bottled water, and a digital recorder resting neatly in the center. Special Agent Rebecca Collins stood to greet him. Mr. Thomas. Thank you for coming. Donald shook her hand. I was asked. Rebecca smiled. You also arrived 15 minutes early. Donald answered simply. I dislike rushing. Another investigator, Daniel Ortiz, entered carrying several document boxes. He nodded politely before sitting across from Donald. Rebecca switched on the recorder. This interview is voluntary. Donald nodded. I understand. We'd like to discuss your employment at Midwestern Freight Systems. I'm happy to help. Rebecca opened the first file. When did you begin suspecting operational irregularities? Donald thought carefully. I didn't suspect wrongdoing. I noticed inconsistencies. There's a difference. Rebecca wrote that sentence down. What inconsistencies? Donald spoke without hesitation. Shipping costs increased while fuel contracts remained stable. Inventory losses appeared in facilities with successful inspection reports. Maintenance expenses rose despite fewer repairs. Daniel looked up. You documented these. Donald reached beside his chair. He placed the worn leather notebook on the table. I documented observations. Rebecca looked at the notebook almost reverently. This is the notebook everyone keeps mentioning. Donald nodded. My father gave it to me. She opened the first pages carefully. No dramatic accusations, no emotional diary. Only dates, times, measurements, questions, simple observations written over several years. Rebecca turned another page. another, then another. Every entry followed the same pattern: observation, possible explanation, verification required, nothing exaggerated. Daniel leaned forward. "May I ask something?" "Of course." "Why didn't you report these concerns immediately?" Donald answered quietly. "Because observations aren't evidence." Rebecca exchanged a brief glance with Daniel. She understood exactly why this notebook mattered. The entries didn't attempt to prove guilt. They simply preserved facts before anyone realized they might become important. Rebecca continued. "Did anyone discourage you from asking questions?" Donald considered the question. "No. They redirected them." "What do you mean? I'd request one report. They'd send another. I'd ask about warehouse maintenance. They'd discuss transportation. I'd ask about inventory. They'd schedule another meeting." Rebecca nodded slowly. "Delay." "Exactly." Daniel opened another folder. "We recovered deleted executive emails." Donald remained silent. "We believe your termination occurred before an internal audit reached senior management." Donald looked toward him. "I've reached the same conclusion." Rebecca slid a printed email across the table. Victor Langford, subject: "Need resolution before audit expands." Donald read it once, then placed it back on the table. "No surprises?" Rebecca asked. Donald shook his head. "No. I wondered why they acted so quickly." "This explains it." Rebecca closed the folder. "Mr. Thomas, we'd like permission to copy your notebook." Donald rested one hand on the worn leather cover. "It belongs to me." "Yes. And we'd return it immediately." He nodded. "You may copy every page." Rebecca smiled. "Thank you." Across the city, Luna sat inside Martin Keller's office, staring at Blake's handwritten note for what felt like the 100th time. Need Donald terminated before divorce finalized. Assets easier to leverage afterward. She finally looked at Martin. "I was never the plan." Martin answered honestly. "No. You were leverage." Luna covered her face briefly. "I destroyed my marriage for someone who treated me like paperwork." Martin remained quiet. He had practiced law long enough to know that some truths required silence afterward. Eventually, Luna asked, "Can I still fix anything?" Martin didn't answer immediately. "You can't change what happened. But you can decide what happens next." She slowly lowered her hands. "What do I need to do?" "Tell the truth." Meanwhile, Rachel Bennett met with federal prosecutors inside the United States Attorney's Office. Assistant U.S. Attorney Caroline Hayes spread several exhibits across a large conference table. "We've matched Donald's notebook to server logs." Rachel leaned closer. "And the timestamps match." Caroline pointed toward 2 columns. Donald noted unusual maintenance invoices on April 7th. Internal emails discussing manipulated repair costs appeared April 8th. Donald questioned inventory discrepancies on June 12th. Executives exchanged deletion instructions June 14th. Again and again. Every observation preceded the internal cover-up. Rachel quietly smiled. "They thought he was guessing." Caroline nodded. "He was measuring." Late that afternoon, Donald returned to Whitmore Logistics. Emily Parker waited outside his office. "Everything okay?" Donald smiled faintly. "The interview went well." She noticed the notebook still tucked beneath his arm. "They gave it back. Immediately." Emily laughed. "I think that notebook has become famous." Donald placed it carefully inside his desk drawer. "My father would have found that amusing." Emily hesitated. "There is another visitor." "Who?" "Luna." Donald paused. "For me. She says she only needs 5 minutes." Donald looked toward the office window. Employees continued working across the operations floor. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. "Where is she?" "Reception." Donald remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he answered. I'll meet her downstairs. The reception area became unusually quiet when Donald entered. Luna stood immediately. She looked nothing like the confident woman who had pushed divorce papers across the kitchen island weeks earlier. No designer confidence, no practiced smile, only exhaustion. Donald stopped several feet away. You wanted to speak? She nodded. Thank you for coming. What do you need? She held out the handwritten note from Blake. I think you should have this. Donald accepted it without reading. What is it? Proof. He unfolded the paper. His eyes moved across Blake's handwriting. Need Donald terminated before divorce finalized. Assets easier to leverage afterward. Donald folded the note again. When did you find this? This morning. He looked at her calmly. Give the original to your attorney. I already did. Good. Silence settled between them. People walking through the lobby pretended not to notice. Luna finally spoke again. I owe you an apology. Donald didn't answer. She continued. I laughed. I thought losing your job proved I had been right about you. Her voice weakened. I confused your quietness with weakness. Donald remained composed. I know. She looked at him in disbelief. You knew. I understood why. She shook her head. No. You couldn't. I didn't even understand. Donald placed Blake's note inside his briefcase. My father used to say something. Luna waited. People often mistake calm for surrender. But calm is usually preparation. Tears filled her eyes. I wish I had listened. Donald looked at her for a long moment. There was no anger, no satisfaction, only distance. I hope you tell the truth. I will. I believe you. She looked surprised. After everything, I believe you're telling the truth now. That sentence hurt more than accusation, because it acknowledged two different versions of her, the woman she had been, and the woman standing there now. Donald nodded politely. I have another meeting. He turned and walked back toward the elevators. Luna watched him disappear without asking him to come back. She finally understood that forgiveness and reconciliation were not the same thing. Upstairs, Harrison Whitmore had observed the entire conversation through the lobby security monitor. Michael Jensen entered quietly. They spoke. Yes. How did it end? Harrison smiled thoughtfully. Exactly how Donald handles everything. No raised voices. No performance. Only facts. Michael folded his arms. I've been thinking. About what? The board made the right decision. Harrison looked toward the elevator display where Donald's floor number continued climbing. No. We made the necessary decision. The right decision that was made years ago. When Donald chose character before recognition. At nearly the same moment, Special Agent Rebecca Collins received an urgent message from the forensic computer team. She opened the recovered file immediately. Her expression changed. Daniel Ortiz looked across the office. What happened? Rebecca turned the monitor toward him. A deleted spreadsheet had finally been reconstructed. At the bottom appeared a budget line no one had previously noticed. Executive contingency payment. Recipient. B. Sterling Consulting. Approved by Victor Langford. Amount $2 million. The payment date matched exactly 48 hours before Donald Thomas lost his job. Rebecca slowly stood. We're no longer investigating separate cases. We're investigating one conspiracy. The arrests began before sunrise. Victor Langford opened the front door of his lakefront home, expecting a newspaper delivery. Instead, 6 federal agents stood on the porch. The lead agent presented a warrant. Victor Langford. Yes. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, and related federal offenses. Victor looked beyond the agents as if someone else might explain the mistake. No one did. His attorney had warned him this possibility existed. He simply never believed it would happen. Across Chicago, television stations interrupted their morning business reports. Breaking news banners appeared across every financial network. Federal investigation expands into Midwestern freight systems. Former CEO arrested. Corporate records seized. Employees arriving for work gathered around televisions in cafeterias and reception areas. No one celebrated. Most simply stared. They had spent years believing the company had collapsed because one executive failed. Now they were learning the failure had been carefully manufactured. Donald was walking through Whitmore Logistics' West Distribution Center when Emily Parker caught up with him holding her phone. "Have you seen the news?" Donald accepted the phone. Victor's image filled the screen as federal agents escorted him toward an unmarked vehicle. Donald handed the phone back. "I've seen enough." Emily looked surprised. "That's all." Donald adjusted his safety glasses. "Someone still needs to inspect loading dock 7. She smiled despite herself. "The company still comes first." He nodded. "It always should." 40 minutes later, Rachel Bennett called. "Victor has been arrested." "I know. There is more." Donald stepped away from the warehouse floor. "What happened?" "Federal prosecutors executed search warrants at 3 locations. Victor's office, his home, and Blake Sterling's former headquarters." Donald remained silent. Rachel continued. "They recovered financial servers Blake believed had been erased." Donald looked toward the rows of freight trailers lined neatly outside the warehouse. "What did they find?" "We don't know yet." But prosecutors sounded confident. Later that morning, Blake Sterling finally reappeared. Not voluntarily. Airport security officers detained him after federal authorities flagged his passport at O'Hare International Airport. He had purchased a one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands. He never boarded the aircraft. Special Agent Rebecca Collins personally questioned him after his detention. Blake sat calmly inside the interview room. Perfect suit, perfect posture, perfect confidence. Rebecca placed a photograph on the table. Victor Langford. Then another. Corporate payment records. Then another. The handwritten note Luna had provided. Blake glanced at each page with practiced indifference. "You have quite a collection?" Rebecca folded her hands. "We're just getting started." Blake smiled. "I'd like my attorney." "You'll have one." She paused. "But before that," she slid one final document across the table. The recovered spreadsheet showing the $2 million consulting payment. Blake looked down. Only for a fraction of a second. Almost imperceptible. Rebecca noticed. Years of interviewing suspects had trained her to recognize tiny changes others missed. He had expected the note. He had expected the emails. He had not expected the accounting records. Meanwhile, Donald received another invitation from Assistant U.S. Attorney Caroline Hayes. This time the meeting took place inside the federal prosecutor's office rather than an interview room. Caroline stood beside a wall covered with organizational charts, names, companies, bank accounts, properties, everything connected by colored lines. Donald quietly studied the display. "It's larger than I imagined." Caroline nodded. "We believe this operation lasted nearly 4 years." She pointed toward one branch. Victor Langford, another. Blake Sterling, several shell companies, consulting agreements, inflated maintenance contracts, artificial real estate valuations. Donald followed the lines carefully, then stopped. "There's something missing." Caroline looked curious. "What?" "The operational managers." "They aren't connected." Caroline smiled. "Exactly. We don't believe most employees knew." Donald nodded slowly. "The fraud stayed at executive level, which explains why warehouse performance remained strong despite financial manipulation." Caroline looked impressed. You reached that conclusion quickly. Donald answered simply. The warehouses always worked. The reports didn't. Caroline laughed softly. I understand why your notebook impressed everyone. She walked toward another evidence board. We'd like you to testify. Donald didn't answer immediately. In criminal court. Eventually. He looked through the office window overlooking downtown Chicago. If the evidence requires me. It does. Across town, Luna sat alone in the nearly empty family house packing belongings into cardboard boxes, not because the court required it, because the house no longer felt like home. She opened another closet. Donald had left almost nothing behind. Only one old winter coat remained hanging near the back. She reached into the pocket before placing it into a donation box. Inside, she found a folded receipt. Hardware store. 5 years earlier. On the back, Donald had written another note. Emergency water shut-off valve behind furnace. Replace batteries every October. She stared at the handwriting. Even on the back of an ordinary receipt, he had been preparing for future problems. She remembered laughing when he labeled storage bins. You think life is one long checklist? Donald had smiled. No. I think emergencies arrive without schedules. The memory hurt more now than it had then. Her phone rang. Martin Keller. They arrested Blake. She closed her eyes. I heard. There is something else. What? The prosecutors contacted me. They'd like your cooperation. Luna answered immediately. I'll cooperate. No conditions. No negotiations. Martin sounded relieved. I'll let them know. That afternoon, Whitmore Logistics held its quarterly board meeting. Donald presented national transportation improvements, warehouse efficiency, reduced equipment downtime, improved safety metrics. No one mentioned the federal investigation until the meeting ended. As directors gathered their papers, one older board member approached Donald privately. I owe you an apology. Donald looked surprised. For what? When Harrison hired you, I thought he was taking a risk. Donald smiled politely. Reasonable people can disagree. The director shook his head. I judged your resume. I should have examined your character. Donald extended his hand. Thank you. The man accepted it firmly. Outside the boardroom, Harrison Whitmore waited. That conversation sounded important. Donald shrugged. Just business. Harrison smiled knowingly. No? It sounded like respect. Late that evening, Rachel arrived at Donald's office carrying another evidence folder. I thought you'd want to read this tonight. Donald opened it. Federal prosecutors had summarized Blake Sterling's initial interview. Most answers consisted of one sentence. I don't recall. I decline to answer. My attorney will respond. Then Donald reached the final page. Interview terminated after presentation of financial evidence. Rachel sat across from him. He stopped talking. Donald looked up. When? Immediately after seeing the accounting records. Donald closed the folder. He finally understood. Rachel leaned forward. Understood what? Donald looked toward the city lights outside his office. That lies can survive conversations. But they rarely survive bookkeeping. Rachel smiled. You really believe records always win? Donald nodded. They don't get emotional. They don't seek revenge. They simply remain. Before Rachel could answer, her phone vibrated. She read the message once, then again. Her expression changed. Donald noticed immediately. What happened? She slowly lowered the phone. Melissa Grant. What about her? She just agreed to testify before the federal grand jury. Donald remained silent. Rachel continued. She isn't just confirming the conspiracy. She says she attended the meeting where your termination was planned. Donald looked toward the leather notebook resting quietly on his desk. For months, every page he had written contained only observations. Tomorrow, someone who had actually been inside the room was finally prepared to confirm them under oath. The grand jury convened on a gray Tuesday morning. No cameras waited outside. No reporters crowded the entrance. Federal grand jury proceedings happened behind closed doors. That was how the system protected evidence before public opinion had a chance to interfere. Donald entered the federal courthouse carrying only 2 items: his identification and the worn leather notebook. Rachel Bennett walked beside him. "You ready?" Donald nodded. "I've been ready for months." She smiled. "I know." Inside the secure waiting room, Assistant U.S. Attorney Caroline Hayes reviewed the schedule. Melissa Grant testified first. Victor Langford refused to answer several questions. Blake Sterling answered even fewer. Donald listened quietly. "What do you need from me?" Caroline closed her folder. "The truth. The same thing you've been giving us from the beginning." Minutes later, Donald entered the grand jury room. 23 citizens occupied the jury box. No judge presided. Only prosecutors, a court reporter, and witnesses. Caroline began with simple questions. "Please state your name." "Donald Thomas." "Occupation." "Chief Executive Officer of Whitmore Logistics." She continued methodically. "Formerly." "Chief Operations Officer at Midwestern Freight Systems." "When did your employment end?" Donald provided the exact date. No embellishment, no bitterness, just facts. Caroline placed the notebook before him. "Did you write every entry personally?" "Yes." "Were any pages added later?" "No." "Did anyone instruct you to create these notes?" "No." "Why did you keep them?" Donald looked towards the jurors. "My father taught me something when I was 12. Caroline nodded. "What was that?" "He said memory changes. Paper doesn't." The jurors listened carefully. Caroline opened one page. "Please read the entry dated April 7th. Donald read exactly as written. No interpretation. Only observations regarding maintenance invoices that exceeded operational requirements. Caroline projected recovered company emails onto a screen. The dates matched perfectly. Another notebook entry, another email, another operational concern, again and again. For nearly 2 hours, Donald's observations aligned precisely with recovered electronic records. One juror finally raised a hand. Caroline nodded. "You may ask." The older gentleman looked directly at Donald. "Mr. Thomas, when you realized something might be wrong." "Why didn't you make copies of everything?" Donald answered after a brief pause. "Because I wasn't collecting evidence." "I was doing my job." The juror slowly nodded. The distinction mattered. Donald hadn't begun with accusations. He had begun with responsibility. Meanwhile, in another secure room, Melissa Grant completed the final portion of her testimony. She looked exhausted. Years of carrying someone else's secrets had finally caught up with her. Caroline entered after the session concluded. "How are you feeling?" Melissa laughed weakly. "Lighter." Caroline sat beside her. "There is one detail I'd like clarified." Melissa nodded. "The meeting where Donald's termination was approved." "Who suggested it first?" Melissa didn't hesitate. "Blake Sterling." Caroline looked up. "Not Victor?" Melissa shook her head. "Victor resisted at first." "What changed?" Melissa closed her eyes. "Blake told him Donald would eventually uncover the accounting structure. He said Donald noticed patterns faster than anyone he'd ever met." Caroline remained silent. Melissa continued. "Blake actually complimented him. He called Donald—" She searched her memory. "Dangerously patient." Across town, Luna waited inside Martin Keller's office for updates. She had spent the previous week answering investigators' questions, providing documents, signing statements, correcting timelines. The process was exhausting. yet strangely peaceful. Truth required less energy than deception. Martin entered, carrying fresh court filings. The divorce hearing has been rescheduled. When? 3 weeks. Luna nodded. Will Donald be there? Yes. She looked down. I don't want anything from him anymore. Martin sat across from her. I believe you. I only want to finish this honestly. Martin placed another document on the desk. There is something else. She looked up. Federal prosecutors may ask you to testify during the criminal trial. I will. No hesitation. Luna answered quietly. I spent too much time protecting the wrong people. At Whitmore Logistics, the board approved Donald's nationwide operational expansion. 3 new regional distribution centers, a technology modernization program, expanded employee training. The vote passed unanimously. After the meeting, Harrison Whitmore invited Donald into his office. You've earned this. He handed Donald another folder. Inside rested a revised employment agreement, long-term incentive compensation, expanded executive authority, additional equity ownership. Donald looked through the pages carefully, not because he distrusted Harrison, because reading mattered. Harrison smiled. Still checking every paragraph. Donald returned the smile. I always will. Good. I'd worry if you didn't. Donald signed only after finishing every page. Harrison accepted the agreement. You know, when I first interviewed you, I noticed something. Donald looked curious. What? You never tried to impress me? I wasn't interviewing for admiration. Donald replied. I was interviewing for responsibility. Harrison laughed. Exactly. Most executives sell confidence. You sold discipline. That evening, Special Agent Rebecca Collins visited Victor Langford inside federal detention. His appearance had changed noticeably. The expensive suits were gone. Dark circles rested beneath tired eyes. Rebecca placed another file on the table. We've completed financial reconstruction. Victor stared at the folder without opening it. You don't need me anymore. Rebecca answered calmly. Actually, we need you more than ever. She slid a cooperation agreement toward him. Blake Sterling is still minimizing his role. Victor remained silent. Rebecca continued. You have 2 choices. Continue protecting someone who already abandoned you, or help us finish the investigation. Victor laughed bitterly. He abandoned everyone. Rebecca said nothing. Silence often accomplished what arguments could not. Finally, Victor asked, What happens if I cooperate? We tell the court. No promises. Only the truth. Victor looked down at the table. For years, he had controlled board meetings worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Now the most important decision of his life involved telling the truth. Late that night, Donald returned home after another long day. The apartment remained quiet, simple, organized, peaceful. He prepared dinner himself. Grilled chicken, rice, vegetables. Nothing elaborate. His phone rang while he washed dishes. Unknown number. He answered. Donald Thomas. A familiar voice responded. Donald? It was Victor Langford. Donald remained silent. Victor continued. My attorney arranged this call. I wanted to tell you something personally. Donald waited. You were right. Another silence. I don't need you to admit that, Donald finally replied. Victor sighed. I know. I need to. His voice sounded older, smaller. We thought intelligence was enough. We underestimated character. Donald looked out through the apartment window. The city lights reflected across Lake Michigan. Victor spoke again. Blake convinced me that removing you would solve everything. Donald answered quietly. It solved nothing. No. It destroyed everything. Donald heard genuine regret for the first time. Not because Victor had been caught, because he finally understood the cost. "I won't ask you to forgive me," Victor said. "I don't expect it." Donald closed his eyes briefly. "I hope you tell the truth." "I will." The call ended. Donald returned to the kitchen. He dried the last plate, placed it carefully into the cabinet, then opened the leather notebook. He turned to a blank page. For several moments, he simply looked at it. Months earlier, every page contained questions, observations, measurements. Tonight he wrote something different. Character outlives reputation. He closed the notebook. Across the city, Rachel Bennett received a secure message from Caroline Hayes. Only one sentence appeared. "Victor Langford has agreed to cooperate." Rachel immediately called Donald. He flipped. Donald wasn't surprised. "What changed his mind?" Rachel answered quietly. "He finally realized Blake planned to blame him for everything." Donald looked toward the notebook resting on the kitchen counter. The conspiracy was collapsing exactly the way it had been built. One truthful statement at a time. The criminal trial began 6 months after Donald Thomas lost his job. By then, nearly every headline had changed. The television cameras that once speculated about Donald's failure now crowded the federal courthouse to report the collapse of one of the Midwest's largest corporate fraud cases. Donald ignored every microphone waiting outside. He entered through the public entrance carrying the same leather notebook. Rachel Bennett noticed it immediately. "You still bring it everywhere?" Donald smiled. "It reminds me why I started writing." Inside courtroom 3, the gallery filled quickly. Former employees, financial reporters, attorneys, curious members of the public. No one spoke loudly. The atmosphere carried the weight of something larger than a single criminal trial. Judge Harold Emerson entered exactly at 9. The courtroom stood. Federal prosecutors presented opening statements first. Assistant U.S. Attorney Caroline Hayes walked toward the jury. "This case is not about a failed company. It is about successful people who believed they could manufacture failure in someone else for personal profit." She paused. "The evidence will show deliberate fraud. It will show manipulated financial records. It will show destruction of evidence. And it will show the calculated removal of the one executive who kept asking questions." She never mentioned Donald by name. She didn't need to. Defense attorneys argued differently. Victor Langford's attorney acknowledged poor decisions. Blake Sterling's attorney insisted every financial transaction had legitimate business purposes. The jury listened carefully. No reactions, exactly as expected. The government's first witnesses established financial records, bank transfers, corporate approvals, deleted server logs, recovered accounting files, everything built patiently, layer by layer. Donald remained seated behind Rachel without expression. He knew the trial wasn't about dramatic moments. It was about cumulative certainty. On the 4th day, Melissa Grant entered the witness stand. She appeared nervous. Caroline approached gently. "Please state your previous position." "Executive Administrative Director." "How long did you work for Midwestern Freight Systems?" 11 years. Caroline nodded. "Did you attend executive meetings involving Donald Thomas?" "Yes." Melissa took a slow breath. "I attended nearly all of them." Caroline displayed a meeting agenda dated 3 days before Donald's termination. "Do you recognize this document?" "Yes." "Were you present?" "I was." "What happened?" Melissa looked toward the jury. "There was discussion about an internal audit." "Who seemed most concerned?" "Blake Sterling." "What did he say?" Melissa closed her eyes briefly. "He said Donald noticed patterns that couldn't be explained forever." The courtroom became perfectly still. Caroline asked another question. "Did anyone propose terminating Mr. Thomas?" "Yes." "Who?" "Blake Sterling." Defense counsel immediately stood. Objection. Hearsay. Judge Emerson considered briefly. Overruled. The witness was present? Melissa continued. Victor hesitated. He asked whether there was another solution. What happened then? Blake said waiting would become dangerous. Caroline allowed several seconds of silence before asking the final question. Why dangerous? Melissa answered quietly. Because Donald always kept records. Across the courtroom, Donald remained motionless. He didn't lower his eyes. He didn't smile. He simply listened. Rachel leaned toward him. That's the first time anyone has admitted it publicly. Donald whispered, I know. The next witness surprised everyone, Victor Langford. He entered wearing a dark suit provided by detention officials, no longer a celebrated executive, only another witness under oath. Caroline approached. Mr. Langford, have you entered into a cooperation agreement? Yes. Why? Victor answered without hesitation. Because the evidence is true. He admitted approving fraudulent consulting contracts, approving manipulated accounting entries, approving Donald's termination. But then he said something unexpected. I wasn't the architect. Defense attorneys objected immediately. Judge Emerson allowed the testimony. Victor looked directly toward the jury. I made unforgivable decisions. I accept responsibility. But Blake Sterling designed the structure. He identified Donald as the only executive likely to uncover it. The prosecutor asked, how did Mr. Sterling describe Donald? Victor looked briefly toward Donald before answering. He said, never underestimate a quiet man who measures everything. Donald lowered his eyes for the first time that day, not from emotion, from remembering. His father had said almost the same words years earlier. Measure twice, move once. The courtroom recessed for lunch. Reporters rushed outside. News alerts spread nationwide. Inside a private conference room, Rachel handed Donald a cup of coffee. You okay? Donald nodded. I've heard most of it already. But hearing it under oath feels different. Rachel smiled. Truth usually does. That afternoon, Blake Sterling finally took the stand in his own defense. He appeared composed, confident, perfectly dressed. His attorney guided him through hours of testimony. Successful businessman, legitimate consultant, professional advisor. Every answer sounded rehearsed. Then Caroline Hayes stood for cross-examination. She carried only one binder, no dramatic gestures, no raised voice. Mr. Sterling, do you recognize this notebook? She placed Donald's leather notebook on the evidence table. Blake looked at it briefly. I've seen photographs. You've never read it? No. Caroline nodded. She opened another exhibit, the recovered spreadsheet showing the $2 million consulting payment. Did you authorize this payment? It was consulting income. Consulting for what? Strategic planning. Caroline projected another document, the handwritten note Luna had discovered. Need Donald terminated before divorce finalized. Assets easier to leverage afterward. Blake remained silent. Is this your handwriting? My attorney advises me. The question is simple. Is it your handwriting? Several long seconds passed. Finally, yes. The courtroom seemed to inhale together. Caroline walked slowly towards the jury. You testified yesterday that your consulting work was unrelated to Mr. Thomas. She lifted the handwritten note. Would you read the highlighted sentence aloud? Blake didn't move. Judge Emerson spoke. You are instructed to answer. Blake read quietly. Need Donald terminated before divorce finalized. Caroline asked why. No answer. She repeated the question. Why? Blake finally looked toward Donald. For the first time since the trial began, confidence disappeared from his face. He answered almost in a whisper. Because he wouldn't stop asking questions. Caroline nodded. No further questions. The silence afterward lasted nearly 15 seconds. It felt longer. The jury had just heard the conspiracy summarized in a single sentence. Donald didn't react. No satisfaction, no celebration. Only stillness. Late that afternoon, Luna entered the courtroom as one of the final government witnesses. She spoke honestly. She admitted laughing when Donald lost his job. She admitted believing Blake's promises. She admitted ignoring Donald's quiet warnings, no excuses, no attempts to protect herself. When testimony ended, she stepped down from the witness stand. As she walked past Donald, she paused. Not to speak, only to nod once. Donald returned the gesture. Nothing more. Some relationships could end respectfully, even when they could never be restored. The jury received the case 3 days later. Deliberations began just after noon. Donald stood beside the courthouse window overlooking the Chicago River. Rachel joined him. Nervous, Donald looked at the water moving below. No. You trust the jury. I trust evidence. Rachel smiled. You've said that since the first day we met. Donald nodded. Because it's still true. Before either of them could continue, the courtroom clerk opened the door. The jury has reached a verdict. The courtroom stood as the jury returned. 12 ordinary citizens carried extraordinary responsibility on their faces. No one smiled. No one looked toward the spectators. Judge Harold Emerson accepted the sealed verdict form from the courtroom deputy. The room became perfectly silent. Donald folded his hands in front of him. Rachel glanced sideways. He looked exactly the same as he had looked on the morning he lost his job. Calm. Present. Waiting. The judge unfolded the document. In the matter of the United States versus Victor Langford and Blake Sterling, he paused only long enough to verify the paperwork. We, the jury, find the defendant Victor Langford guilty. The first word echoed through the courtroom. The judge continued. Guilty on all counts. Victor slowly closed his eyes. There was no visible reaction beyond a long exhale. Months earlier, he had admitted to himself that this outcome was likely. Now it had become official. Judge Emerson continued reading. We, the jury, find the defendant Blake Sterling. Another pause. Guilty? Guilty on all counts. A murmur spread briefly through the gallery before the judge raised one hand. Order. The courtroom became quiet again. Blake remained motionless. His attorneys whispered urgently beside him. He never responded. For years he had believed every negotiation could be controlled. Every person could be persuaded. Every weakness could be exploited. Now 12 strangers had ended that illusion. Judge Emerson thanked the jurors for their service before scheduling sentencing. As everyone began leaving, reporters rushed toward the courthouse entrance. Inside the courtroom, Donald remained seated. Rachel looked at him. It's over. Donald slowly shook his head. No. The trial is over. The consequences are just beginning. Outside reporters gathered around prosecutors first, then around defense attorneys. Finally, someone spotted Donald walking down the courthouse steps. Microphones immediately surrounded him. Mr. Thomas. Do you feel vindicated? Another voice followed. Do you have anything to say to Blake Sterling? Another. What message do you have for people who believed you were responsible? Donald stopped walking. The crowd became completely quiet. He looked directly toward the cameras. I don't have a message for Mr. Sterling. He paused. I do have one for anyone facing something similar. The reporters leaned forward. Donald continued calmly. When someone attacks your reputation, protect your character. Reputation belongs to other people. Character belongs to you. He nodded politely. Thank you. Then he walked away. The statement appeared on every major business network before sunset. Not because it was dramatic, because it was simple. and simple truths often traveled farther. 2 weeks later, Judge Emerson returned to the bench for sentencing. Victor Langford accepted responsibility completely. He apologized to former employees, shareholders, his family. Finally, he looked toward Donald. "I destroyed the career of the one person trying to protect the company." "I'm sorry." Donald nodded once, nothing more. The apology could not restore the past, but it acknowledged it honestly. Blake Sterling chose a different path. He continued blaming markets, business conditions, misunderstandings, other executives, even poor legal advice. He blamed everyone except himself. Judge Emerson listened patiently, then delivered sentence. "Mr. Sterling." The evidence demonstrated extraordinary planning, not a momentary lapse. "You manipulated trust. You exploited personal relationships. You attempted to destroy another person's livelihood for financial gain." The sentence reflected exactly that. As federal marshals escorted Blake away, he looked back one final time. Donald met his eyes. Not with anger, not with triumph, only quiet certainty. Then Blake disappeared through the courtroom doors. That chapter closed forever. 3 months later, Whitmore Logistics officially opened its newest national operations headquarters. More than 800 employees attended the ceremony. Unlike most corporate celebrations, there was no celebrity entertainment, no oversized stage, no fireworks. Instead, Harrison Whitmore invited warehouse employees to stand in the front rows: drivers, mechanics, dispatchers, receptionists, people who rarely appeared in executive photographs. Donald approached the podium. He looked across the audience before speaking. "When I accepted this position, I promised 3 things. Safety, efficiency, trust." He paused. "The first 2 can be measured. The third must be earned." He looked toward the employees. "This building doesn't belong to executives. It belongs to everyone who keeps promises when nobody is watching." The applause lasted much longer than he expected, not because the speech was impressive, because everyone believed it. Afterward, Harrison quietly joined him. "You've changed this company." Donald smiled. "The people changed it. I simply stayed out of their way." Harrison laughed. "You're still impossible to compliment." Months later, the divorce became final. The hearing lasted less than 30 minutes. No arguments remained. No unresolved property disputes. Every financial issue had already been documented. Judge Watkins signed the final order. Donald and Luna walked into the courthouse hallway together. For the first time in nearly a year, there were no attorneys beside them. Only silence. Luna finally spoke. "I wanted to thank you." Donald looked at her. "For what?" "You never tried to humiliate me," he answered honestly. "I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to finish." She nodded slowly. "I understand now." She hesitated. "I've started volunteering. Helping women who have been manipulated financially." Donald smiled gently. "That's meaningful work." "I hope so." She looked down briefly. "I'll spend a long time earning back my own respect." Donald answered with the same calm voice she remembered from years earlier. "That's the only respect any of us can truly control." She smiled through quiet tears. "Goodbye, Donald." "Goodbye, Luna." Neither looked back. Neither needed to. One cold December morning, Donald visited his father's grave again. Snow covered the ground. The cemetery stood completely silent. He placed the old leather notebook beside the headstone. Not to leave it there, only to rest it for a moment. He opened to the final blank page. For nearly 10 minutes, he didn't write anything. Then slowly he added one last entry. "Lost my job. Kept my character." Everything else followed. He closed the notebook gently. The leather cover had become worn after years of carrying it through warehouses, boardrooms, courtrooms, and hotel rooms. Its value had never been the paper. Its value had been the discipline it represented. Donald stood quietly before the headstone. I finally understand. Wind moved softly through the snow-covered trees. He slipped the notebook beneath his arm and walked back toward his truck. Not toward revenge, not toward victory, toward another ordinary workday. Because the strongest people rarely spend their lives proving others wrong. Every life eventually reaches a moment when words lose their power and only actions remain. Donald's story reminds us that true strength is rarely loud. It doesn't demand attention, seek revenge, or celebrate someone else's downfall. Real strength is built quietly through discipline, integrity, and the small choices we make every single day when no one is watching. People may misunderstand your silence, underestimate your kindness, or mistake your patience for weakness. But time has a remarkable way of revealing what emotions often hide. Lies need constant protection. The truth simply waits. Character may not bring instant rewards, but it creates a foundation that no betrayal, setback, or public humiliation can permanently destroy. In the end, Donald didn't win because he was smarter than everyone else. He won because he never abandoned his principles even when life gave him every reason to. Maybe you've experienced something similar. Perhaps someone judged you before knowing your story, betrayed your trust, or celebrated your lowest moment. If so, I hope this story reminds you that your current situation does not define your future. Keep doing the right thing. Keep learning. Keep preparing. Your greatest response is not proving someone wrong. It is becoming the person they never believed you could become. Now I'd love to hear from you. What was the most powerful lesson you took away from Donald's journey? Have you ever been underestimated only to prove people wrong through patience and perseverance? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Tomorrow's story explores another unforgettable journey of resilience, justice, and the quiet strength that changes everything. They spend their lives continuing the work that made them right in the first place.